Yeah, it's a big
Anyway,
file.
I'll introduce myself before we start. It is just me. And this is very odd that I'm getting high key lighting from the window now. So the the physical space isn't helping me either. Okay, so it's only the one of the three of us. The other two helped write this, so that's really key. That they're included as a list of authors, but we take it in turns to present these because it doesn't really need all three of us to do all of these. So yeah, okay, so what I'm going to be talking about, hopefully once we get everything off the ground 6 minutes in, is Theatre in the Round, which is a 360-degree theatre VR project that we completed last year at Durham and are hoping to extend further with other things. If you could just go on to the next slide, please, Anshul. Okay, so these are the three people involved, and then as you can see at the bottom, and also key to this are the students that we got engaged with, that we engaged as part of the project as well. So our roles really complemented each other quite really well. Alistair is the content expert, so he's the expert with a background in theatre studies. He teaches English studies. He's knew all about the texts that we used. James is the tech expert. He's got a lot of expertise with 360-degree video, and we've all done a little bit with VR in the past. And then there's me. My PhD is in virtual reality. I was part of the second wave of metaverse people back in the 2000s, building on the first wave, which was in the 90s. And now, great, it's all back again, and the metaverse everyone's talking about it again, sort of 10 years after the last time. So we're capitalizing on some of that new interest, some of the new technology. We use the Meta Quest for all of this sort of stuff. But we'll go into the next slide so that we can talk about what our goals were. Thanks, Anshul. I don't know if you also want to go into presentation mode to clarify this. So this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to give the students some, this is actually based on getting an actual pedagogical thing aimed at, so created. We wanted to give them the opportunity to experience something different when they're studying English. At Durham, there's no theatre studies department. There's no actual performance department. So there's the theatre group there. But it meant that the students who were studying some of these texts didn't actually get much of an experience of being part of the text that they were observing. They basically, as English studies students, they read them as books. So they would read through these books and not really have a feel for what was going on. So if we go into the next slide, what our goal was to give them some experience of this through virtual reality. So virtual reality through a headset. So the technology itself, I think, was important here. And not all VR is necessarily through headsets. You can do it on a screen. Some people would even argue theatre itself is virtual reality. In fact, the term was first coined by a dramaturge who describes theatre's virtual reality as the first theatre back in the 1920s, I think. So this is an example we drew on. This was somewhere in Virginia, Blackfriars Playhouse. They recorded a video of a performance of Hamlet, I think. And what they did when they created this, they just got a 60-degree camera and stuck it on the edge of the stage. So you can view this 360-degree camera, image, video, put the headset on, and then as you look around, you can see either the stage or you can look around and see the audience. Why this didn't work, why this felt really alienating, was that the image you feel present in that space, but you feel present not as a member of the audience, not as an actor, but as somebody in the audience standing at the edge of the stage on view to everybody, and it feels really a very odd experience. So the placement of that camera really let down the experience of observing that as an audience member or as a actor within the stage. If we go on to the next slide for another example. This was done as part of a degree course teaching theatre, and this is a modern update of Taming of the Shrew, and it's obviously Taming of the Shrew is about domestic violence, domestic abuse, oppression within the home. And what this did was recreate it as an argument within a kitchen, and you are placed within that kitchen. So you can look around, there's other people watching what's going on. You feel complicit because you cannot get involved. You're a passive observer, but there's this violent, not physically violent, but verbally violent argument going on right in your space. And so that was something we wanted to draw upon in the sort of examples that we used for our students. So our idea was, if we go on to the next slide, please. We drew on two different scenes. We drew on the Get Thee to a Nunnery scene from Hamlet, which people are pretty familiar with. And then we also drew on a more modern play called Top Girls, which is set, it's 80s. So it was way older, way out of the experience of our students, but I wasn't in an employment agency in the 80s, so it felt very real to me. And it's an interviewer, an interviewee, somebody going onto the books for it to be in a temping agency. So what we wanted to do with these was give the students who were part of these texts, could experience these texts, three positions. We would start them off with what we called a third person point of view. Well, it is a third person point of view. We gave them the point of view of Polonius, so it's still diegetic. In other words, it makes sense within the world of the play that there would be an observer there. So it's a real observer. You're taking on the role really of Polonius, but he's not involved in the scene. He's just looking down on what the other two, Hamlet and Ophelia, are doing, and they're having an argument basically. And then we also shot it from Hamlet's perspective. So the actor playing Hamlet got out the scene, which is difficult because it's a 360-degree video, stood outside the room and then read his lines and then Ophelia just performed to a camera. And then we switched it, so then the Ophelia actress got out of the way, and then we put a camera where she was and shot the scene for a third time. With Top Girls, we had a non-diegetic camera, which were, i.e., there's no sense within the world of the play that this position would be there, but we stuck a camera in the space between the two actors, and then we shot it from both perspectives, one after the other. So we had three videos for each, and then we gave them the students a seminar where they would watch all three, one after the other, and then we did a focus group to gather some data about it. So next slide, please, Anshul. That's great. So again, there was a tight time scales. The students brilliantly at learning the lines really, really quickly. We shot Hamlet in the Cosin's library, which is a medieval library. We had to have the custodian sitting in there, so he hid behind the staircase so he wouldn't be in shot, but he had to make sure that we weren't going to steal any books again, because we've had books stolen before. And also that we weren't going to put anything damaging on the medieval floors. Well, they weren't medieval, but, you know, the wooden floors. And then we shot the next one in an office that we sort of kitted out with period signs and made it look like an office space from the 1980s. This is James's bit, but we used, there you can see the cameras we used. It's all Greek to me, in fact, literally, because of the word theta in there. I don't know what that is, but we had lavalier mics, which are basically, they are wireless mics that you can use. And we didn't really go to town on any of the production designs because this was just a proof of concept. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what we wanted the students to try and get out of this situation. What does putting you in that point of view tell you about the motivation of that character? And then also, can you tell stuff about body language? One of the things we wanted to do was look at the point of view of the person there. Are you looking in different directions? When you are looking at 360-degree video, the only thing you have control over as a viewer is which direction you look in. You can't move within that space because it's a pre-recorded space. But we wanted to see if there was anything that we could get from performance by looking in different directions. We also wanted to reveal if anything about the way that things were being performed told the students anything about the way that what the intentions of the director were. And then once we did all this, it's like, how much of this comes from 360 theatre? How much of it could you got from video? How much of it could you get from the book? But also, what is the advantage of sticking this on your head and looking around and being part? Well, being part of the scene? And even, do you actually feel like you are part of the scene? Because it's not a given that just by placing somebody within that space visually that all the other things ensue. So, okay, next slide again, please. Sorry it's late taking so long, but there's a lot of pictures involved and I guess it's quite slow. So we had 2 focus groups. We ran it twice. We had 7 students each time. We got them to read the scripts in advance, and ideally within a learning situation. This would be things that they would already have studied within the curriculum. Again, I explained about the 6 videos, so 3 different perspectives for each of the 2 performances, and you can see there the space that they were viewing them in. It was big enough that they could sit and look around and not get in with within each's boundary spaces. And for focus groups, it was your standard thematic. We did some inter-code of validity and that reliability checks, in that we got 2 of us to code them differently and then saw whether or not all the codes all matched up. They did pretty well. There was very little that came out of the second focus group that wasn't in the first. So even though it was quite small scale, I think we got to a point where we got data saturation. We could have run it lots and lots more, but I don't think we'd have got much more new stuff out of it because we'd already started to replicate everything within those 2 focus groups. And we're asking them basic impressions, expressions about the technology. Okay, next slide, please. So this is some of the stuff we found. This is the stuff I'm more comfortable with, and the technology, which is the experiential stuff of virtual reality and all those sorts of things. One of the things that we weren't expecting, and one of the things that was kind of what I call a confounding variable, in that we were asking them, what does 360-degree video do? And they said, well, you could see close up to what the actors were doing. Well, you could have done that within a video, within a film text, because TV, film, it gives you close-ups. So you could have seen all of this directly. And they said you get to see so much more than you would in the theatre. What we hadn't realised was how few visual resources students have access to when they're studying these texts. A lot of these are, for copyright reasons, not available. You can't just go onto YouTube and watch a lot of these plays. And then unless they're actually performed and the students can go and see them in a theatre, then they don't actually get them, experience them as actual plays. They're just reading them as books, basically. So it's very difficult as we're going through when they're talking about stuff to say, well, is this just because they've seen it as a video, or is this because they've been immersed in it as 360 video on a HMR head-mounted display headset? Okay, next slide, please. I should have one of those, pretend that I'm clicking it. This is one of the things that came out of it, and the whole embodiment presence thing, which is what my area is. It was really validating a lot of that sort of stuff. One of the things that was neat was that they felt that more of their social cues, more of their feeling involved in that action was happening because they felt like they were in that space. So it's triggering a lot of that sort of social connection, social to and fro that you get. So even though they couldn't be active members, they still felt like they were in the action. And that led to a different reading, a more intimate reading of what was going on, in addition to being able to see the things up close. Although there was where the immersion failed was that they couldn't move further and closer away from them. There was none of the, although we were getting the whole kinesics element, which is the seeing body language and gestures and things. We weren't getting the kinesics thing, the other way around, the proxemics thing of being able to move further and away and closer to them, like you might get within a computer-generated virtual world. So it wasn't quite as immersive as it could have been, but it was triggering a lot of stuff that was quite immersive. So so kinesics, yes, proxemics, no. One of the things that helped was that the third person point of view, there was no audience there. So one of the things that you have to suspend your disbelief about is you're seeing Hamlet on the stage and he's supposedly on his own ranting to himself about to be or not to be. But you're having to suppress to suspend your disbelief that he really is on his own. But when you're watching this on 360-degree video, in the Cosin's library, he really is on his own. You've got no suspension of disbelief. And so it had more of a kind of feeling of reality because of that absent audience. You are the only person there. What was really interesting as well was that when we were talking about what it felt like to be in that position of the actors, Hamlet didn't feel very authentic, because when you're in the position of Hamlet, the actor, brilliant actor, Jack, was just yelling at Ophelia, and all you feel is this disembodied voice yelling from your position. But when you're Ophelia, as a passive recipient of this, and it also worked for the person, if you're sitting in Janine's role in the Janine Marlene thing, the interviewee within the Top Girls play, you really felt what it felt like to be ranted at, because you're passive, you have no way of responding, you've got this actor leaning in and yelling at you. And so they really felt, although Ophelia in the text is silent and you don't always get a feeling for what Ophelia's feeling, by placing them within this as this silent performer within that space, it brought that whole element of what it must feel like to be Ophelia within that scene. It brought it to life. So for the first time, rather than her feelings being reported by others, you could feel them personally and physically yourself. So, okay, next slide, because we need to move on a bit. Just to make sure we got 5 minutes left at the end. One of the things that also worked was, we hadn't anticipated this, but in retrospect, it was one of the obvious things, was that by doing the third person thing first, it was really important, because within these spaces, within 360 video, you have no body. You're completely disembodied. You can't look down and see yourself because there's actually a camera there. There's no actor there. So in order for them to feel like they had a body, we had to have that third person perspective to start with, because then they could see what that person looked like. So when you were in the role of Hamlet, when you're in the role of Marlene, you knew what she was wearing, you knew how she was behaving. And so therefore you felt that enabled you to feel a body at kind of a second-hand space, but you could still feel like you were there and knowing who you were within that space, because you'd seen it from the third person perspective, where it kind of didn't. But that also led to this really interesting phenomenon, which is they didn't choose where to look at all. They looked where the actor had looked. They said like they felt they had a responsibility to the performance to do what that performer had done. And this is things that previous bits of the literature had already noted. So again, something that came out, something that we could understand from reading the literature, reading that whole sense of embodiment, but it did kind of imply that the sense of embodiment was complete, even though they didn't have bodies, because they'd already seen that body within that space. Okay, we're moving it quickly on now because we're running out of time. Okay, so that I've just covered the freedom to look. We'll move on to that, to the next one. And this is the interesting thing. It's for the students. None of them had done VR before, which was interesting. They said it was a new kind of medium. It wasn't quite theatre. It wasn't quite film. It was somehow an amalgam of the two, and something quite different as well. And if we move on to the next slide, I think is this the one with my favorite quote on? No. But the one that was missing was, it was better than watching. And this is I'm going to use that as a title for the next paper I do on this. It's a paper in press or in submitted at the moment, which we're hoping will be accepted this time around about this. But what I'd like to do next is look at what this actually really is when we talk about better than watching. What is that experience that is different about VR? And can we create a language to describe it? Because this is where we all started to feel what it started to fall down a bit, was identifying what the words were to try and describe what these different kinds of feelings were. And so this is what I'd like to do, is bring in the body representation people who are neurologists, bring in some mind and body stuff from the philosophers, and some other VR teachers to dig into this meeting of what is better than watching. And then, of course, incorporate this into more teaching. Okay, that's, I think we've got 5 minutes left. I managed to catch up a bit on the 6 minutes that we lost about with pathing. But here's some questions to get you started. And also, what's your own experiences of VR? In which ways do you think it is a different medium and is better than watching? So, yeah, I'll just end the share. This well, and Angela, if you could just stop the sharing, then we can have a look at the chat.